Hello, and welcome back to Speak More Fluently.
Great to be here.
Today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, I think it's really cool, how using storytelling techniques can actually supercharge your journey to speaking English more fluently, more naturally.
Yeah, it's a really interesting angle.
Think of it like unlocking a secret weapon. It's not just about making your English sound better to listeners, but it genuinely helps you remember vocab, grammar, almost without trying.
Effortlessly is maybe pushing it, but certainly more easily.
Okay, fair point. But trust us, understanding this stuff, it can really shift how you learn and, how you speak English.
Absolutely. We spend so much time on grammar drills and word lists. Don't get me wrong, that stuff's important.
Sure, foundational.
But it's only part of the picture, right?
Yeah.
Fluency is also about connecting, making ideas stick.
And what's the best way we connect?
Stories. It's just how we're wired, I think, for narrative.
Exactly. So stories aren't just, fun. They create these amazing mental hooks. When you hear a story, your brain isn't just sitting there passively.
No, it's active. It's building connections, picturing things.
Feeling emotions. And all that makes the language in the story, the new words, the sentence structures, way more likely to, lodge in your memory.
It's like learning in 3D compared to just flat text on a page. Much richer.
Totally.
And it's not just about memory. Understanding how stories work, how they flow, it gives you a kind of blueprint for your own speaking.
How so?
Well, it helps you organize your thoughts, structure what you want to say, express yourself more clearly, more coherently. It's like learning the underlying architecture of how we communicate effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we actually start using this? Let's kick off with the beginning, literally, grabbing attention, that hook.
Right, the hook.
What are some ways to really pull a listener in right from the first sentence?
Well, think about times you've been immediately drawn in. What did the speaker do? Often, it starts with maybe a provocative question.
Something that makes you think immediately.
Yeah, or maybe an unexpected fact, something surprising that makes you go, huh, really?
Or, like you said earlier, just jumping straight into the action.
Exactly, in medias res. Starting in the middle of things, it creates instant intrigue, doesn't it? You immediately wonder, wait, what's going on? How did we get here?
Yeah, you're playing catch-up, which makes you pay attention.
It's all about creating that initial pull, that magnetic force. Give your listener a reason to lean in, to invest their attention.
Nail that opening.
And you've set the stage. You've signaled that what's coming is worth listening to.
Okay, so you've hooked them. Now what? You mentioned structure, beginning, middle, end. Seems basic, but why is that simple framework so powerful?
Well, that classic three-part structure. It offers a kind of comfort, a familiarity. It makes it easier for listeners to follow along and process what you're saying.
So the beginning, that's the setup.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Setting the stage. Who are we talking about? Where are they? What's the main problem or challenge they're facing? It gives that essential context.
And for someone learning English, that setup probably helps them anticipate the kind of words they might hear.
Exactly. It provides context cues for vocabulary.
Right. It's like painting the first layer of the picture. You need the who, where, and what's at stake.
Then you move into the middle, the confrontation, sometimes called. This is where things get complicated.
The plot thickens.
Precisely. You introduce obstacles, maybe raise the stakes, build that tension and anticipation. It's the journey, the struggle to solve that initial problem.
And for learners,
Crucial part. This shows language in action, in dynamic situations, how characters react, how events unfold, using different words, different grammar, all within that unfolding context.
okay. And then the end, the resolution.
The end wraps it all up, ties up loose ends, resolves the conflict, gives that feeling of completion.
Which is satisfying.
It is. Emotionally satisfying, sure, but it also helps cement the language and the events that led to that conclusion. Makes the whole thing more memorable.
So that clear structure acts like signposts for the listener.
Kind of, yeah. It helps them predict what might be coming, which in turn makes it easier to absorb new language within that predictable flow.
Makes sense. Now, a story isn't just events, is it? It's about the people, the characters. What makes characters really stick with us? Why do we remember some and not others?
Good question. Think about characters you love from books or films. What do they have in common? Often they have really clear goals, right? Something they're striving for.
Yeah, a motivation.
Understanding that motivation helps us connect, helps us empathize. We follow their story more closely if we know what drives them.
Adds that layer of meaning. And you mentioned how they talk, giving characters distinct voices.
Oh, absolutely. That's a powerful tool. The words a character chooses, their tone, maybe specific idioms or phrases they use, it brings them to life.
Shows their personality.
And their background, maybe their perspective. For English learners, this is gold. It exposes you to different styles of spoken English, how language changes depending on who's speaking.
And you also touched on relatability earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Even in, say, a fantasy story, if a character has a very human problem,
Like dealing with loss or trying to fit in or making a tough decision.
we connect with that. It bridges the gap. Makes it easier to relate and probably easier to remember how they express those feelings.
Exactly. Empathy is a powerful memory booster. When you care about a character, you're invested. And you become invested in the language they use, too.
Okay, let's shift slightly. This idea of show, don't tell. Painting a picture with words. Why is that so important for making a story immersive?
Well, instead of just telling your listeners she was angry, you show it.
How?
You might describe her fists clenching, maybe her brow furrowing, the sharp edge in her voice. You let the listeners see and hear the anger. They experience it more directly.
So it's about engaging the senses, not just the intellect. You mentioned visual stuff, but also sounds, even tastes, smells, touch. How do you weave those in naturally?
Doesn't have to be overwhelming. Even small, evocative details work wonders. Well, instead of just saying someone spoke, maybe include a short snippet of what they said. Or use the sound word onomatopoeia. A quick mention of, I don't know, the smell of rain on hot pavement or the rough texture of bark. It adds depth, makes it tangible.
And for learners, those sensory details often link to specific words, right? Making them easier to recall later.
Definitely. That word is now tied to a sensory experience in their mind, not just an abstract definition.
Right. It builds this multisensory experience for the listener. Okay, let's talk rhythm, the rhythm of the story. Pacing and suspense seem really key here. How do we use those well?
Well, one basic tool is varying your sentence length.
How does that affect things?
Short, sharp sentences can create a feeling of speed, urgency, maybe tension. Think action scenes.
Quick cuts.
Exactly. Whereas longer, more descriptive sentences, they can slow things down, allow for reflection, build atmosphere.
So mixing it up depending on the mood or action you want to convey.
Precisely. And then there's suspense itself, holding back information, hinting at things.
Teasing the listener.
Kind of. Not revealing everything at once, maybe introducing unexpected twists. It keeps the audience hooked, wanting to know what happens next.
And for learners, that probably encourages active listening, trying to pick up clues.
Absolutely. It forces them to engage, to predict. Great comprehension practice.
The cliffhangers, of course, especially for longer stories.
The classic. They create that powerful sense of anticipation, makes people eager to come back for the resolution. Very effective for keeping engagement up over time, like in a learning context.
Okay, let's dig into something super relevant for improving actual spoken English.
Yeah.
Dialogue. How can the conversations within a story help us speak more fluently?
Oh, dialogue is fantastic for that. It's a window into how people really talk.
Not textbook talk.
Exactly. You hear the natural pauses, the ums and as sometimes people interrupting each other slightly, and all those contractions that make spoken English sound well-spoken, like I am gonna, not going to.
Right. Hearing those in context helps you understand when and how to use them yourself, naturally.
Definitely. And we talked about distinct character voices. That's crucial here, too.
Because
one character might speak very formally, another might use loads of slang. Exposure to that range.
Yeah.
It trains your ear for the nuances of spoken English.
And expands your own toolkit for expressing yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, dialogue is just a brilliant way to embed new vocabulary and grammar in a really practical, memorable context. You see how it's used.
Now, all these techniques sound great, but a story still needs to connect, right? Personally connect with the audience. How do we make sure that happens?
Yeah, relevance is key. It starts with thinking about who you're actually talking to.
Tailoring it.
For English learners, for example, if you can relate your stories to experiences they might share, maybe learning struggles, travel experiences, cultural interactions.
It resonates more. The language feels more meaningful to them.
Exactly. If you're learning English and hear a story about someone else facing a similar communication challenge, you're instantly more invested.
Makes total sense. And you mentioned asking questions earlier, interactive questions. How does that build connection?
Well, if you pause the story and ask your listeners, what would you do here? Or what do you think happens next?
You're pulling them in.
You're making them active participants. They have to think, process, maybe even formulate a response in English in their head. Keeps them engaged.
Like they're part of the story unfolding. And those little cultural notes you mentioned, explaining an idiom or a custom.
Yeah, those can be really helpful. They bridge potential gaps in understanding, make the language feel less foreign, more accessible, deepens the connection.
Okay, building on that interactivity, what about more direct things? Like asking listeners to predict words or checking vocabulary.
Yeah, those can work well too. Prediction tasks. Like you pause just before a key word and ask listeners to guess it based on the context.
Forces active listening again.
And reinforces vocabulary. Quick vocab checks too. Maybe defining a tricky word just before or just after it appears in the story that can really help solidify understanding.
So you might say, she felt a profound sense of. Any guesses what word fits here? Give a beat, then continue.
Exactly. Or simple follow-up comprehension questions afterwards. Even just asking listeners to quickly summarize a section in their own words. It all boosts retention and builds their confidence.
Okay, so we've taken our listeners on this journey, used all these techniques.
Yeah.
How do we wrap it up? How do we make the ending stick?
The ending is crucial. It's your last chance to make an impact. A resolution that makes the listener feel something: surprise, amusement, inspiration, whatever it is that's going to resonate more.
That aha moment or that feeling of satisfaction.
Right. It often comes from a really well-crafted, memorable conclusion.
And maybe suggesting a next step.
Yeah, like a call to action almost. Encourage listeners to apply what they've heard. Maybe suggest they try retelling a simple story using some of these ideas, or just reflect on how it connects to their own communication.
So it's not just the end, but the end. And here's what you can do with this.
Exactly. It solidifies the learning, makes it practical. A strong ending ensures both the story and the language inside it have a lasting effect.
Okay, wow. So let's try and quickly recap. We've explored how really getting to grips with storytelling techniques, things like strong openings, clear structure,
And memorable characters using sensory detail too.
controlling the pace, using realistic dialogue,
Connecting with your audience, adding interaction.
and crafting those impactful endings, how all of that can be, well, a real game changer for your English fluency, for expressiveness, for actually remembering vocabulary.
That's the core of it. These aren't just tricks for telling fun stories. They're powerful tools for learning and really internalizing English in a more natural and effective way.
So as you keep working on speaking more fluently, maybe think about this. How can you weave some of these storytelling bits into your own conversations, even just sharing something that happened in your day?
A little bit of structure, a touch of show, don't tell.
Can make your English more engaging, definitely more memorable, and yeah, ultimately help you become more fluent.
It all feeds back into the learning loop.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for exploring all this with us today. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure.